Good afternoon and welcome to the Module 1 of the Specialized Training Course on Regulation of Gas Markets. This is the last webinar of this module, and today the title of this webinar is the Development of the Gas Market Liberalization Process in the European Union, and it will be presented by Miguel Vazquez, who is a Jean-Monnet Fellow at Loyola de Palacio Chair. My name is Magdalena Mos, and I'm a Training Coordinator at Florence School of Regulation, and I am also moderating all the FSR webinars. And before we will connect with Miguel, I would like to point out a couple of issues regarding the webinar agenda. So the first point is the introduction. So in this point, I will also very briefly explain the control panel. Once again, since some of you didn't participate in the first and the second webinar, therefore, I want to be sure that all of you will know how to use the control panel today. Then we will proceed to Miguel's presentation. And then after the entire presentation, there will be time for Q&A. So in this section, our today's speaker will reply for the questions submitted by you. And I will just very briefly explain how you can submit your questions in just a couple of seconds. And then we'll conclude today's webinar with final announcements. And I will have announcements regarding the webinars of Module 1 and also some announcements regarding the residential training that will take place next week. Therefore, if you could wait until the end of today's webinar, I would really appreciate that. Okay, so this is the control panel that you can see right now on your computer screen. There are a couple of features that I would like to explain right now. So the first one is this orange arrow. It means that if you would like to follow today's webinar on your full computer screen, you can just click here and the control panel will be minimized. And if you would like to, during the webinar, use some other features of this control panel, you can always click in the same place and the panel will reopen. Below, you have to minimize the window. Therefore, if you would like to check something on your computer or something on the internet, you can always click here below and the entire webinar will be minimized and you will find the webinar icon on your taskbar. That means that you can come back to the webinar whenever you wish without disconnecting. And below there's the hand raise tool. Therefore, I would like you to use this tool right now. And therefore, if you can just hear me right now and if you can see my presentation on your computer screen, please click on the hand raise tool and I will know that everything is fine and that we can proceed to the further parts of today's webinar. Okay, thank you very much. I will give you a couple of more seconds. Okay, everything is okay. Thank you very much. And however, if you have any technical issues right now, you can always use the question box here below. This is the place where you can submit also the questions to Miguel, and I will ask him those questions during the Q&A section. However, remember that we have very limited time for Q&A, therefore I would appreciate if your questions could be very brief. And right now, there will be a time to connect with Miguel, so I will unmute Miguel right now. Good afternoon, Miguel. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you, Magda.
Thank you very much. So now I will switch to your computer screen very quickly. I'm doing this right now.
And you should see my computer screen now.
I can see a presentation. I think also our audience. So I will connect again in around 45 minutes. Okay, good luck.
Thank you, Magda. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending to this last webinar before you come to Florence to enjoy a full week of training on gas regulation. Today, I am going to talk about Europe. The first webinar of this series was Sergio's speaking of or comparing the gas sector with the oil and power sectors in order to find the main elements, the main specific needs of the gas sector in terms of regulation. After that, Michelle explained the specificities of the regulation of gas sector and especially regarding gas networks. Because they are at the core of any regulation of the gas industry. What I'm going to do today is to focus my attention on the European liberalization process. Michelle especially compared and identified many of the decisions taken in the process of implementing markets in the gas sector. Today I'm explaining what are the key decisions and choices that were made in order to implement markets in Europe. To do so, I'm going to begin from the same point as Sergio and Michel, which is identifying what are the main elements, the main characteristics of the gas supply chain in order to understand what are the specific needs on the industry. The first point is that the gas commodity is fossil fuel, and for our point of view, one central characteristic is that the gas commodity is very specific. When I say specific, I mean that the identity of the parties involved in gas transaction matters. It's not as easy as going to a market and buying apples. It's not easy to find gas sellers and gas buyers. So all this implies that you will typically find bilateral relationships continued over time. In addition to this, gas is a commodity with low density, which means that you will usually find also big network infrastructure used to transport gas from one point to another, usually pipelines. And these infrastructures are specific to the transactions involved in network activities are also characterized by strong specificity. Up to here, gas sector is very similar to the power sector, but as Sergio pointed out, in fact, in the gas industry, storage is not as costly as in the power sector. Is of course less or more costly than in the oil sector, but you have some storage possibility. This makes the webinar of Sergio a very intelligent approach because it places the gas industry somewhere in between the oil and the power sector. And probably the elements that we will be needing for implementing markets in the industry will be somewhere in between as well. So in summary, the main point I want to make with this slide is that it's not easy to implement markets in the gas industry. And you will usually find hierarchies in the transactions or in the organizations of the gas sector, either long-term contracts or directly vertical integration. And this is our starting point, the situation of the industry before the liberalization process began. We had producers, many times outside Europe as Gazprom, but sometimes inside Hasuni, in the upstream, and in the downstream we had legal monopolies, usually national monopolies, as Gas de France in France or Gas in Germany. And these two segments were connected by significantly hierarchical relations. You will be discussing a lot the details of these relations, especially with Carlos Lapuerta next week here in Florence. But I want you to give some of the central elements that we need to understand the process or the liberalization process in the European Union. This picture represents the supply chains I've just commented. And we see here a description, a brief, broad description of the main elements of the coordination of a regulated gas industry. We have a regulated price for the gas for industries, power plants, or household, or end users in general. We have national incumbents owning transport, storage, and distribution at the national level. We have gas supply agreements to buy gas from distant production fields to the particular national system, and the associated gas transport agreement, because we need to carry the gas from the production field to Europe. And this, along this chain, we see different kinds of hierarchies. We see vertical integration directly with ownership at the national level. We see very long-term contracts in gas transport, which is usually called ship or pay, and we see the analog for gas supply, which is called usually, or the typical contract you find is the take or pay contract. So this is our starting point. This is what we had, significantly integrated gas industry. And some of the countries in Europe decided unilaterally to begin the process of liberalization. I am not commenting on that today. This will be probably studied in detail next week. What I want to point out or to describe is the process from the European Commission to create a single European market, combining all the markets in, or as many as possible, markets in Europe. And this process began in the mid-90s, when the European Commission decided that it was a good idea to have a single gas market for Europe. And in particular, began the campaign for the liberalization process with the first gas directive in 1988, and continued that process with additional directives and through antitrust actions or anti-monopoly laws. This is a process I'm going to describe today. From the first gas directive to today, what are the main decisions, what are the main choices that the European Commission has made. To understand that, to describe the process, the first point is to realize that the European Commission has two main set of tools at hand in order to implement markets. On the one hand, the definition of rules, analogously, the definition of or the design of the markets for gas. This is a set of ex-ante definitions concerning the rules that all market players need to comply with. And also, the European Commission can rely on antitrust action. This is essentially an ex post tool, contrary to the definition ex-ante of rules. Here, the action is taken ex post, and it's usually related to the enforcement of the rules regulated, defined ex ante. So we have our objective, which is implement markets in Europe. We have the tools, especially I am concerned now with regulation, and I want to ask you, first of all, what do you do, or what would you do to start the liberalization process? I'm going to launch a poll in order to get your answers for that. And I'm going to give you two possible answers. The first one is breaking up the former national monopolies, for example, dividing Gas de France in several companies. The second option I'm suggesting here is facilitating access to national networks. I've seen that you are still voting. And okay, I'm closing now the poll and sharing with you the results. And we see that most of you think that facilitating access to national networks is the first step, the main tool to liberalize. Before I answer, or I give my answer to this question, let me go back to the presentation and analyze what is going on, or what do we mean by liberalization. This is our supply chain. This is what we are willing to, or we are looking for implementing markets in. The problem is that it's not equally easy to implement the market along this chain. For example, national transmission, these big infrastructures are difficult to organize around market arrangements. But on the other hand, it's easier to have competition in consumption and production of natural gas. So even if it's true that facilitating access to national network is a good measure, breaking up monopolies is not a complete answer to the question, because we would need to answer or to give details as well in the way that such monopolies are broken. But in any case, and there I agree with all of, or with those who voted for facilitating access, breaking up monopolies from the European point of view might not be necessary. And here we have a difference, important difference with respect to the liberalization process in a national market. We are trying to implement a single European market, and to do so, what we can do is to have several national monopolies competing among them. And there, the opening of national networks is especially relevant, because if you allow German companies to enter into the French system, what you have is Gas competing against Gas de France. And thus, the market would be, or the sector would enjoy some competition, even if the monopolies are not touched. So the message here is that networks play a role because they may reduce market shares, they can introduce credible threats to national incumbents. But the problem we've seen is that introducing markets in networks is not straightforward. So here, I want to ask you my next question to continue with the process. We've said in the first question that we need access. But the problem is, or the next question I want to ask you is how we implement such access. So I'm opening the next pod to get your answers. And I'm giving you three possible answers. The first one is gas release. This is a typical measure which consists in forcing incumbents to sell part of their contracts to it's a way of providing access to end users when the system is dominated by national monopolies. The second option is ensuring the open access to national networks, is everyone can access the network that was owned in the previous scheme by the national incumbent. And the third option I'm giving to you is that both options are the same. I'm giving you some more time to vote, and I'm seeing that most of you are already voted. So I'm closing the poll and sharing with you the results. And we see that well, many of you think that open access to national networks is the good measure, but many of you also think that there's no real difference between gas release and open access. Well, going back to this, gas release and open access is not exactly the same. Gas release is a measure concerning gas contracts, access to consumers, and open access to national networks just involves the transmission business, transmission activities. The question is that if you give, or if you introduce a gas release measure in a system, as was the case in, for example, France or Spain, without giving access to the network, I'm not meaning that the gas release in Spain did not give access to the network, just that if the introduction of gas release does not come with access to national network is essentially useless, because you don't have real access to the end consumer. So going back to the presentation, the point here is that even measures aimed at breaking up national monopolies as gas releases needs the access to national network. So we need to ensure such access. Probably the first point in this reasoning to liberalize markets is that we need open access, but we don't know yet how we implement this access, because you can do that in several ways. Michelle spoke a bit about this in her webinar. The first possibility is to implement regulated third-party access. This means that the regulator defines a rule to access the national network in order to have non-discriminatory access to that network, but this non-discrimination is governed by the rules defined by the regulator. The other broad possibility is negotiated third-party access. Under this scheme, the rules are defined by the parties involved in the transaction, so that regulators don't need to define what are the rules of use, the rules of access. The main thing, or both possibilities, are useful or can comply with the principle of non-discrimination. It's not that markets needs to implement regulated third-party access to function appropriately. In fact, the US system is based on negotiated third-party access. The question is that this negotiated third-party access is seen as more market-based or dangerous from the regulatory point of view, in the sense that national regulators don't have the power to review tariffs. But in any case, and I want to stress that here, regulators are required to ensure compliance with the non-discrimination principle. They have a monitoring task. So in the end, both regulated and negotiated third-party access can comply with the principle of non-discrimination. So with this reasoning, we are in 1988 when the first package was issued. The idea is we need open access, and we have several possibilities for that. This is essentially what the first package said. To create the market, the first package pointed out that we needed third-party access, but that access could be regulated or negotiated, and also introduce soft unbundling of the transmission and commercial function. Of course, the main challenges of this is that it's not very binding. You are not defining very well what national authorities need to fulfill. So in the end, the practical changes associated with this first package were limited to mostly the countries where the liberalization process had already started. But the main element, the main message that I want to highlight of this first package is that it did not decide on any particular solution to implement markets. It only consisted in highlighting, or almost only consisted in highlighting, that the first element to have liberalization in Europe was open access. One of the elements of the first package was soft unbundling. And my question is, if we have third-party access, why unbundling? Why do we need unbundling? I'm going to launch another poll to get your answers about this. And I'm going to give you 3 possibilities. The first one is to decrease economic value of utilities. In that sense, if you have a monopoly consisting in transmission and supply activities, and you separate transmission and supply, the value of the resulting companies is lower. The second option is to ensure non-discriminatory access. And the third possibility is to stimulate investment in infrastructure. If you have companies only devoted to transmission activities, it's sensible in a way to expect more investment in infrastructure. So I see you are still voting. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to do that. And I'm closing the poll, sharing with you the results. First thing I see is that none of you chose unbundling to decrease economic value of utilities. I'm glad of that, because this is usually a counter-argument against unbundling. It's difficult to say that this is the objective of unbundling in any case. I see that some of you answered to stimulate investment in infrastructure. That is not a bad answer. It's true that if you have less incentives to foreclose access to networks, you will probably have more investment in infrastructure. But going back to the presentation, what we can say in any case is that unbundling, or the direct effect of unbundling, is to weaken incentives to discriminatory access, to foreclose access to markets. And it's true that probably as a consequence of that, you will see more investment, but the direct consequence is to weaken incentives. So unbundling is, in fact, a further step in facilitating access. We were concerned, we identified open access as the main element. Unbundling is a kind of additional measure in order to have such open access. And well, we see that the problem of the first package was that the practical consequences of it were limited. So in that view, the European Commission issued the second package in 2003. The main points there was to, in a way, to define more precisely what are the elements of the liberalization process. Here, the European Commission did decide. It decided first to implement regulated third-party access. The future European market is going to be, or was going to be, based in regulated third-party access. It also said full unbundling of transmission and commercial functions, and also stressed that gas consumers would have a choice of supplier by 2007, I think. The problem, or the main challenge of this, of course, now it's easy to say, but the problem with this is that it didn't work. Before I go with the analysis of that, I want to highlight that the second package was aimed at deciding the way to open access to networks. It is not only now that networks need to be open, it's that the access are open through regulated third-party access. But we saw in 2007, through the sector inquiry launched by DG Competition, that the second package didn't work. We observed that markets in Europe were not functioning well. They were highly concentrated. The main element we were looking for, which was open access, was not observed. We observed lack of liquidity, limited access to new entrants in the infrastructure. As a consequence of that, cross-border sales were not a credible threat to national incumbents, and we also saw lack of adequate information and transparency in the price formation. So in the end, the second package was not successful in implementing markets in Europe. So the next step is to analyze what were the problems for the European Commission. And the European Commission identified three main points. The first one was unbundling. The measures to get unbundling were not precise enough. Unbundling was not effective yet. The introduction, or the second point, is that the introduction of the regulated third-party access created the need for regulators to define rules. But in Europe, we had a significant amount of markets, and each of those markets need rules. So the problem is that each market in Europe had different rules to access a network, which created difficulties to trade cross-border, and thus, in the end, to have credible threats at the national level. So the European Commission said, if we want EU-wide markets, we need EU-wide rules. And the third point was that, okay, retailing is an important activity. We're not seeing enough success in the implementation of retail competition, so we need additional rules. This is the third package. The European Commission launched the third package in 2009 with the objective of answering or addressing the problems the European Commission identified after the sector equity. The main points there were that structural unbundling was required, the introduction of a deeper level of harmonization in the European market, and to get those harmonized rules, the third package created a new institutional framework in order to define and implement those rules, and it defined higher standard of public service obligations and consumer protection in order to take care to have well-functioning markets in the retail level. So as for the first point, unbundling, I'm not going into the details here. You are going to discuss this a lot next week here in Florence. I'm just, I want to highlight here that what the European Commission did was to define what was the allowed unbundling in the gas markets in the European Union. It was possible to have ownership unbundling, of course, this is a perfect unbundling, and the European Commission also allowed to have two different organizations with some level of vertical integration, but each of them controlled by national regulatory authorities in order to avoid foreclosure of networks and in general strategic behavior. The first one was an independent system operator, where the national regulatory authorities approves investment planning. The other one was an independent transmission operator, which is a vertical integrated undertaking, but subject to heavy regulation and permanent monitoring. So unbundling was the first concern of the European Commission. The second concern was the harmonization of rules. And here I want to ask you, how do you think the harmonization is achieved? Because we don't have a European regulator, we have many regulators in Europe. It's not easy to harmonize markets. So I'm going to launch the fourth poll to ask you about this. And I'm going to give you three possible questions. The first one is precise rules from the European Commission. The second one is precise rules from ACER. This is one of the new institutions created by the third package. It's the Association of Energy Regulators. And the third option is that harmonization is achieved through precise rules from ENSOG, which is another institution for or defining the third package, which is the Association of Transmission System Operators. So I see that you're still voting. I'm going to give you a couple of more seconds. But in general, I'm seeing that most of you think that Acer is in charge of defining these precise rules. I'm going to close the poll now to share with you the results. And okay, most of you think that the regulators are in charge of defining these precise rules. Well, the process is complicated. Let me go back to my presentation to show you the process, to understand that the three answers are correct or the three answers are incorrect, because you need a lot of negotiation here to implement anything. This is the scheme for implementing the set of rules. For example, this one is for the rules of gas balancing. I borrowed this from slides of ENSOG in the gas balancing workgroup. And the process of defining rules begins with the priority settings from the European Commission. We can see that this is not the implementation of precise rules. This is just a setting of the priorities that the rules need to pay attention to. With these priorities, Acer, the European regulators, develop the framework guidelines. This is a set of general principles and measures that need to frame the rules finally implemented in each of the country. So in this view, Acer is not in charge of defining precise rules. He's in charge of defining general guidelines that need to guide the future development of the rules. These framework guidelines are approved by the European Commission, and then they are sent to ENSOG. ENSOG is in charge of defining the final set of rules. In this case, they are precise rules in the network code, but complying with the framework guidelines defined by Acer, that in turn were complying with the priorities set by the European Commission. So what we can see is that we have a decision chain here aimed at negotiating a lot and sharing the views of the final set of rules implemented in the European market. After ENSOG defines a network code, the decision chain continues with a review from Acer, approval of the European Commission, and in the end, the network code is sent to comitology for the final approval. So the main point of this slide is to show you that the process for defining harmonized rules is significantly complex, and this need for defining rules comes from the definition of regulated third-party access. If you are in a system like, I don't know, in Japan, where you don't have regulated third-party access, all this process is not, you won't find all this process. So we've seen the second point. We had unbundling. We needed to develop harmonized rules for the Europe to solve the problems found by the sector inquiry back in 2007. Now we need the third pillar, the third part of this, which is the retailing activity. And I'm going to launch another poll here to know your opinion on, okay, we have unbundling, but should we do something else with the retailing activity? The first answer I'm giving to you is yes. We have competition, but energy utilities, gas utilities are large companies, and consumers need to be considerably protected. The second option is the opposite, is no, we believe in markets, we don't need to do anything. And the third option is, okay, we don't need to be radical here. It depends on kinds of consumer. So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to finish your voting. Now we are seeing most of you are voting for the third one. I see that you don't like to be radical. Okay, so I'm closing the poll now to share with you the results, where we see that most of you think that it depends on the kind of consumer. It's difficult to fight with this idea, in the sense that it's difficult to think of your grandmother doing a lot of trading to optimize the price of the gas received at home. I understand that, but at the same time, we are trying to implement markets, and implementing markets with I don't know, healthy retail competition is difficult. So I go back to the my presentation to analyze what are the measures implemented by the third package. The first part is that the third package says very clearly that we want retailing competition, we want consumer choice. To do that, switching cost for energy suppliers from energy suppliers should be reduced, and also the information and non-discriminatory measures for consumers need to be observed. So in this sense, the third package is concerned with having a healthy retail market. But at the same time, it establishes public service obligations and consumer protection. In this sense, the third package says that member states need to take care that vulnerable customers are protected, are not exposed to market abuse from energy utilities. So in this sense, what we see is that the European Commission said that the correct answer was C. We need to have good retail markets, but we also need to have vulnerable consumers protected. And in this regard, one of the main tools for consumer protection is the price control. If you say that which is the price that final consumers are seeing for the gas supplies, you are sure that they are not suffering market abuse. But at the same time, the problem is that they are not enjoying markets either. If the price is regulated, it's difficult to see a really good retail competition. So the problem here is that although it's important to have vulnerable consumers protected, the European Commission is calling for an end to price regulation, because it's very difficult to have retail competition with price regulation. And here we go with my last question for you. We've seen the first set of tools, tools ex ante, based on regulation. My last question is, okay, we have regulation, is it enough? I'm going to launch here this last question, and well, the options are simple. Yes, we foresaw any competition problem. So if we foresaw any competition problem, all competition problems can be solved by ex-ante rules. The second option is the contrary. No, market abuse situations need to be studied ex post, because it's impossible to foresee all competition problems. And the last one is the not radical one, is we don't know very well, let's try to combine both just in case. Most of you have already voted. I'm going to give you a couple more seconds to finish your voting. And I'm going to close now the poll and share with you the results. Yeah, you're not radical at all. I see. You again voted we should combine both. And it's true that the European Commission thinks that. Let me go back to my presentation to analyze the antitrust action, because antitrust has been a very relevant tool in the implementation of a European or a EU-wide market. In fact, DG Competition is the most powerful body in the European Commission. They have the right to write offices, for example, which is always very impressive to me, at least. They can impose fines, significant fines, and in fact, targets of DG Competition, although they have the right to appeal in the European Court of Justice, no appeal has ever succeeded. So what I mean is that DG Competition is not a good enemy to have. To see the kind of actions that DG Competition has taken in order to enforce and implement markets, several examples are the DG Competition action against the joint selling of gas by Norway and Denmark. It was an example of coordinated selling of gas. Another very important example is the DG Competition action against destination clauses. They are clauses aimed at impeding suppliers to renegotiate gas after the gas is sold. And anti-competitive, or the DG Competition action against anti-competitive behavior, especially blocking third-party access. The results of such actions are pretty well impressive. They stopped the coordinated sale of gas. It's very difficult to find any case of coordinated sale of gas. Destination clauses have disappeared in Europe. You don't observe any more tactics to block third-party access. And an interesting question is, would be the end of oil-linked prices the next frontier of DG Competition? Because now Gazprom is being investigated by them, and it's well, or it may imply that oil-linked prices are the next target of DG Competition. So let me finish with this timeline, this general scheme. We've seen the main elements or the main logic for the process of liberalization in Europe. We began back in 1998 with the first directive. We saw that the intention, the main idea of the European Commission was to point out that opening networks was the first step in creating markets. But we saw that it had limited practical effects. So the European Commission issued the second directive, where many of the decisions were taken, and many important decisions were taken. In particular, the regulated third-party access was so defined as the proper way to open national transmission networks, and so the need for rules in Europe. We saw that answering the 2007 sector inquiry, the European Commission launched or issued the third package with three main pillars: hard unbundling of transmission and commercial functions, harmonization of the rules needed because of the decision of the regulated third-party access, and increasing concern with retail competition. And what we are seeing now is the process of creating these harmonized rules. In 2011, for example, the ACER guidelines on capacity allocation and gas balancing were issued, and we will see this year if I recall correctly, the implementation of the network codes by national TSOs launched issued by NSOG. So that was all. Thank you very much, Magda.
Thank you very much, Miguel. So let's just very quickly go to Q&A. And the first question will be, do you think that the third package is the last one?
Well, it's not the last one because we are now seeing I'm not sure if it's official now, but we have an infrastructure package. In addition to all these rules and harmonization of rules, the European Commission is concerned with investment in infrastructure, so it's issuing an additional package establishing rules for network investment. In addition to that, I don't know if this set of measures is going to be enough. I really don't know, of course, but the idea is that the regulated third-party access and most of the rules implemented in these harmonizations are conceived in a situation where gas consumption were essentially flat. But now we have a significant need of flexibility in gas consumption. We have massive introduction of gas-fired power plants, extreme interaction with the gas market, and I'm not sure if current set of rules are dealing appropriately with this new need of flexibility. So maybe we will see in the future another package aimed at providing or organizing such flexibility in gas consumption. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. And the second question will be, can you give us an example of countries with regulated TPA and negotiated TPA?
Yes, sure. In fact, it is a very interesting question, and I think it's the webinar of Michelle was very interesting to understand that and the implications of those differences. For example, the negotiated TPA, of course, the US is a clear example where pipeline owners negotiate access with network users on a market base. Of course, the price is regulated because in the end, a pipeline is a monopoly, but the terms and condition of use are based on negotiation among market players. You will study this a lot with Jeff Magholm next week in Florence. Don't worry. The regulated TPA is, for example, the entry-exit system in Europe. It's you define what are the rules, the conditions regulatorily for accessing the network, and markets don't play any role in that definition.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, should the European Commission start thinking on a new regulation for shale gas?
Well, yeah, that's a tough question. Thank you very much. I'm not sure new regulation is always the solution. I think that many of the elements that this series of seminars were intended to do is to provide basic elements behind the regulations. And probably the question is, what is shale gas introducing in gas markets? And probably you have a question of regulation of the production activity. It's a different way of producing, and maybe regulation needs to be revised, but I really don't know. That needs to be studied. The most direct problem for me is the question of the network use. shale gas is going to change even more the way gas transmission networks are used. I've commented just before the problem or the new situation with gas-fired power plants. Shale gas is the production side of that. It's going to have to imply way more flexible use of gas networks, and I'm not sure at all that flexibility can be dealt with under the current regulations. So probably concerning the network use, shale gas should suggest at least beginning or the beginning of a process to assess whether we need new rules or not.
And we have time for the one more question.
Great.
And the question is, do you think that the third package will be enough to stimulate competition, or that the crisis will reinforce concentration because of the difficulties of new entrants?
Can you repeat the question?
It's a long question, but it has two parts. So
my memory is...
Well, you were the presenter for 45 minutes, so we can forgive you for sure. Okay, so the question is, do you think that the third package will be enough to stimulate competition, or that the crisis will reinforce concentration because of the difficulties of new entrants?
Well, thanks. The question is very difficult and very relevant. Thank you very much for the question. I think it has two parts. The first one is it going to be, the third package is going to be effective? Well, I don't know, because it's, because of this problem of flexibility. I've commented already, gas systems needs flexibility, and the third package is not worried enough, in my view, with flexibility. The second problem is about financing, I think. Is it possible now to see, or that we are seeing increased entry barriers to gas markets? I really don't know, because I think it's not a extreme problem, at least in the sense that it needs new regulation, because in the end the European market is, in my view, I don't know, it's conceived as a market where, or it's conceived as competition among incumbents. So the only thing that incumbent needs is access to networks, and access to networks, I don't think is very influenced by the financial crisis. Maybe in the it's true that the investment in infrastructure is more difficult than the situation, and this is probably the motivation and the logic for the new energy package of the European Commission to help in the investment of new infrastructure. But concerning the access, I don't think it changed a lot. In fact, I think I recall, you can ask Sergio for them, a study of Sergio Ascari showing the numbers of the new situation in Europe, where he showed that you see entry in this sense. You see national incumbents competing abroad other national incumbents, and suffering competition or credible threats in his own national system. So to answer the question briefly, I don't think the financial crisis is impacting in many points, in addition to the investment in infrastructure, and we have already a new infrastructure package. So that was my answer, I think. Please, Magda,
Yes,
Tell me
well,
if
it's
I
almost
forgot
true.
something.
No, this was the last question. So thank you very much, Miguel. It's time to say
Uh,
goodbye, and I have to conclude today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so right now I will very quickly switch back to my computer screen and just finish my presentation. I think that you can see my presentation right now. Yes, you can see that. So just very quickly, right after I will close today's webinar, you will see automatically on your computer screen the survey, which is consisted of 7 questions. I would really appreciate if you could fill out this questionnaire, and especially that the last question is an open question, and you can submit your comments regarding today's webinar and also the previous webinars and the entire format of webinars in Module 1. So if you have any comments regarding that, we would really appreciate that. And tomorrow, so on Wednesday, you will receive the recording and the PDF from today's webinar. As you know, this is the last webinar, so this will be the last recording. And also, I would like to say that for those of you who will participate in the full residential course next week, and for those who will participate also in Module 2, so the first 2 days of the training, I will send you some reading materials today sent by Alex Burns. He will be a speaker on Tuesday, so he sent me a couple of things that he thinks that can be interesting for you to read before his session. So you will receive an email from me later today. And the last very quick announcement is that on our FSR website, you can find all the videos from our public webinars that we organize almost every week. So you can go to the video section and you will find webinars there. And you can also find some information regarding the residential training that we organize here. Okay. And remember that you can always contact us if you have any questions regarding the Module 1 or the residential training. You can always contact me. And if you have any questions or comments regarding today's webinar, here is the email of Miguel, so you can always contact him afterwards. I will give you just a couple of seconds to write it down. I think it's enough. If you didn't and you would like to contact Miguel later on, you can always send me an email and I will send it to you. And well, now it's time to say goodbye. So thank you very much for joining today. Thank you very much for all the questions. To Miguel, I would like to also use this opportunity to thank our speakers of Module 1, so Sergio, Michel, and Miguel. And I would also like to thank Pedro Barreira, who is taking care of the editing of our webinars. And I will see you next week in Florence, some of you already on Monday and some of you on Wednesday. So until then, I wish you a wonderful afternoon and goodbye. Thank you.